welcome back to Celebrating Culture. We're here today with Archbishop Aymond. Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure.
St. Joseph's Day. I mean, how many schools or churches actually do St. Joseph's Day now?
I don't know the numbers, but I can tell you this, that it's increasing more and more. It's a lot of parishes, but now it's a lot of the schools are doing something also. And a couple of years ago, I went to one of the grocery stores. They were doing a St. Joseph altar. So it really has become widespread. I don't know of any other diocese in the United States that celebrates it with so many different altars.
How many do you get to see on a day?
Probably about 6.
Do you start off that morning of St. Joseph's Day in Gretna?
I go there at noon, and that is one of the largest, if not the largest, in the Archdiocese.
Father Frank that started that, he told me he started it actually with like one banquet table.
Well, it's half of the gym now. Yeah, it's huge. There's a long line of people waiting to get in, and they literally work year-round in preparing for it.
We're here at St. Joseph in Gretna, and I'm with Father Frank, who's been here for 40 years with St. Joseph. Father, welcome to the show.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to be with you again.
So tell me, before you started the altar here, you were in Sicily.
I was ordained a priest in Sicily. My parents came from there, but I was born in Pennsylvania.
How did you get the idea to do an altar?
They used to have an altar, but it fell apart. I mean, the people left. So I said, well, I heard all about it, and other people were having it, so I said, next year I hope to have one. And ever since, as I say, the rest is history.
I'm thinking it's over 1,000 people that will get fed here.
Oh, more than that, sometimes 2,000 to 3,000. They start feeding right after the little children. The Holy Family are fed, and then from then they go to about 6:30 at night.
The feeding of the children, what is that to symbolize?
It goes back to the tradition of the Christmas, that there was no room in the inn for Mary to give birth to Jesus. So they reenact the Christmas scene. Is there any room for you? Joseph knock on the door, and they say there's no room. The Trinity, all three is perfect. So the third time you ask, is there any room? Then you say yes, and then the little family can come in, and you feed the children.
Now I understand the fava bean.
That's also the origin of the celebration too, because Sicily, back centuries ago, people were starving. The fava bean is what kept them alive. And then also tradition, keeping your lucky bean. Carry it with you, you know. The big thing is also the cookies. In Sicilian, they call them cuccidati. They're like fig Newtons, but they're made with the ground figs with citrus in it and some nuts, and then they roll it out and they bake them and decorate them with different sprinkles on the color. You need a grace of special favor from God. They would say, grant me this grace and I will have an altar in my house. And so what they would do, they would put in their home, and they invite all their friends, and they would put up the statue with all the candles and cook all the food. It was like a votive offering.
Father, I want to thank you for being on the show and for what you've done to Gretna and for St. Joseph's. It's amazing to see where we are today, and I look forward to the 40th.
The tradition is that you prepare the altar and people come and eat for free. But the real purpose is that we will share the food with the poorest of the poor.
In Metairie, at St. Francis Xavier, you were there this year as well.
I was.
There was a gentleman that started that.
Jack and Gail Siciliano.
I remember Jack told me the statue he has. His mother told him, if you have a statue, you have to have an altar that measures up to the statue.
I hadn't heard that one.
We're here today at St. Francis Xavier School, and I'm with Father Palermo. Father, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
What a beautiful altar you have today.
Everybody tells me it's one of the best, and I certainly agree. It is aesthetically beautiful and full of a lot of love and a lot of effort by many people.
And you also feed today.
We fed over 1,500 people today.
So what is the history with feeding?
Well, it goes back to the history of the altar itself, coming from Sicily. There was a drought in Sicily. The people of Sicily prayed to St. Joseph for rain. The rains came, the crops grew, they were saved from starvation. And in an act of thanksgiving and to fulfill a promise, they erected altars, or actually tables, in the towns and squares and villages of Sicily, and they invited the poor to come and to feast. When the Sicilian immigrants came over to the United States, they brought that custom with them. And so part of it is making food available for the poor, the needy, and just really for anybody who wants to come. Anybody can come to the table.
You can see a lot of community today. A lot of people show up and actually volunteer, bring something to the altar.
We certainly have had a few hundred people who have worked on the altar in some capacity. I can tell you that for 7 weekends, we had 50 to 60 people making cookies. They made 35,000 cookies. And in addition to that, we had many people helping to set up altars, many people helping with cooking, all of the food that remains from the St. Joseph altar. We're going to have trucks and vans going in various different directions to homeless shelters and to other charity outreaches that the church has. So we'll be able to provide again for needy people.
Are there tourists that are coming here that are visiting New Orleans for other reasons?
Well, I have met people from several other places around Louisiana as well as from out of state. There was a man who told me today that he flies in every year from Virginia and schedules some of his vacation time here so that he can participate in the St. Joseph altar because they don't have this at the Catholic Church where he worships or any place in his area. So yes, we're promoting the tourist economy locally. So.
And there's another part of the altar where I see in memory of on the altar.
There's a custom of having a picture of a deceased loved one. Sometimes it's somebody who has died recently, and so whatever is contributed to the altar is contributed in honor and in memory of that person and in continuing prayers for that person. Other times, some of the pictures, you can tell that they're quite dated and that the people in them probably died many years ago, but the family still remembers them.
Father, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
It's always amazing to me when I go to the altars because I'll meet people from 10 different parishes and they have their own favorite altar that they want to go to, whether it's large or small. St. Joseph is the patron of the Universal Church, so it's appropriate that we honor him.
Archbishop Aymond, I want to thank you for being on the show. And stay
you,
tuned,
Charles.
we'll be right back with more of Celebrating Culture.